Imagine a nation shaped by women, yet their stories are barely whispered. For centuries, Luxembourg's Grand Duchesses held immense power and influence, guiding a small country through 2 world wars and immense social change. But what if I told you their legacy, once so prominent, nearly vanished from history? Welcome to my channel Words of Time. Get ready to uncover the lost line of the duchesses who truly defined Luxembourg. Luxembourg is often seen as a land of numbers and skyscrapers, a polished financial hub nestled between France, Germany, and Belgium. Its global reputation is tied to wealth, banking, and diplomacy. Many picture a small but powerful state run by polished ministers, efficient civil servants, and grand dukes whose titles recall an older age. Yet behind the formal image lies a longer, quieter story shaped by women who rarely appear in official records. These women, duchesses and countesses mostly, did not simply adorn the courts of Europe. They influenced treaties, negotiated alliances, and held their lands together in times of chaos. Without them, Luxembourg might never have survived to become the stable and prosperous country it is today. Luxembourg's early history was not one of steady power. It began as a fortress, a small stronghold built in the early Middle Ages by Siegfried, Count of Ardennes, who traded for a rocky promontory above the Alzette River. From this humble base grew a lineage of counts and dukes whose fortunes rose and fell with the politics of surrounding empires. Yet even in those first centuries, women played crucial roles. Noble marriages were political tools, and duchesses often acted as guardians of the realm when their husbands went to war or died young. These women ruled through council meetings, letters, and religious patronage, maintaining control in a world that expected them to remain in the background. One of the earliest figures who stands out in this story is Countess Ermesinde of Luxembourg. Born in the late 12th century, she inherited a divided territory at a time when inheritance laws favored men. Ermesinde refused to be sidelined. Through a combination of negotiation and determination, she regained much of the land that had been lost during her father's rule. She also granted charters that strengthened the rights of her towns, allowing commerce and self-government to grow. Her leadership made Luxembourg more cohesive and more respected among its neighbors. Ermesinde's rule was not loud or grand, but it was steady and effective. She proved that in a fragmented medieval world, a woman could lead with both authority and grace. After Ermesinde's time, Luxembourg passed through different hands as dynasties shifted and borders changed. Each new marriage or inheritance carried the risk of erasing the local identity that had begun to form. Yet many of the women who entered the ducal line brought with them new forms of influence. Some came from French or Burgundian courts and introduced more sophisticated administration. Others used religion to strengthen loyalty among their subjects. In convents and churches they founded, they encouraged education and the arts, planting the seeds of a cultural life that would later flourish. These acts may seem minor compared to the later rise of industry or finance, but they helped shape the moral and civic foundations of the country. During the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Luxembourg's strategic position made it both valuable and vulnerable. It stood at the crossroads of Europe, caught between larger powers. For centuries, it was passed among rulers like a token in political bargains. Yet again, women were often the ones who ensured continuity during transitions. When armies marched and treaties shifted, duchesses managed estates, arranged ransoms, and kept local institutions running. One such figure was Duchess Elisabeth of Görlitz, who governed during the early 15th century. Although her rule ended in the sale of Luxembourg to Burgundy, she left behind a record of strong will and administrative skill. She faced rebellion, financial trouble, and betrayal, yet she managed to maintain order for years longer than her male advisors expected. Her story reflects the resilience that became a defining feature of Luxembourg's identity. As Luxembourg became part of the Burgundian and later the Habsburg realms, local power diminished. But the duchesses and noblewomen tied to the region continued to play key roles in shaping European politics. One of the most striking examples is Margaret of Austria, who served as regent of the Netherlands in the early 16th century. Although not a Luxembourger by birth, her policies affected the region directly. She maintained a careful balance between local autonomy and imperial control, ensuring that smaller states like Luxembourg were not swallowed entirely by larger entities. She encouraged the arts, trade, and legal reform, creating a sense of order in a time of upheaval. Women like Margaret demonstrated that political intelligence was not limited by gender, even when formal power was. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the role of noblewomen in Luxembourg and neighboring territories had shifted. Absolute monarchies concentrated authority in the hands of kings, and women were pushed back into ceremonial roles. Yet even then, they found ways to exert influence. Grand duchesses and consorts became patrons of education and social welfare. They supported hospitals, orphanages, and schools, often funded through their own estates. Through these efforts, they helped soften the effects of poverty and war. Their compassion shaped the social conscience that remains a hallmark of modern Luxembourg. While the Grand Dukes signed laws and treaties, it was often the duchesses who bridged the gap between the court and the people. The Napoleonic era brought deep disruption. Luxembourg was occupied, restructured, and later attached to the Kingdom of the Netherlands. For many, this was a period of confusion and loss, as old institutions crumbled and new ones struggled to take hold. Yet even then, female figures continued to influence the direction of the country, though their names seldom appear in official chronicles. Noble women acted as cultural intermediaries, maintaining correspondence with leaders across Europe. Some helped preserve historical archives and church treasures that might have been destroyed during the wars. Their quiet persistence kept alive a sense of continuity when political borders were redrawn. The modern identity of Luxembourg took shape in the 19th century, when it became a grand duchy under the rule of the Dutch king, but maintained its separate status. In this period, the women of the royal family began to play more visible roles. Grand Duchess Charlotte, who ruled during much of the 20th century, is perhaps the most famous of them all, but her influence was built on the legacy of those who came before her. Her mother, Grand Duchess Marie Adelaide, faced harsh criticism for her handling of World War I and eventually abdicated, yet her successor restored stability and faith in the monarchy. Charlotte's strength and empathy earned her deep respect. During World War II, when Luxembourg was invaded and occupied by Nazi Germany, she became the symbol of national unity. Broadcasting from exile, she urged her people to resist and to believe in freedom. Her speeches gave courage to citizens who faced imprisonment or exile. In many ways, she became the embodiment of Luxembourg's endurance. Grand Duchess Charlotte's leadership demonstrated that symbolic power could have real impact. She had no army and no control over the occupied territory, yet her voice carried weight because it expressed shared values. After the war, she helped guide the country through reconstruction and modernization. Her example inspired later generations of women to take part in public life, not only in ceremonial roles, but also in politics, education, and business. Today, Luxembourg's commitment to gender equality can trace part of its moral foundation to her reign. While she is often celebrated as an exceptional woman, her story fits into a much longer line of female influence stretching back to Ermesinde and beyond. Behind the royal figures were countless women whose names rarely appear in textbooks. Farmers, teachers, nuns, and merchants all contributed to the survival and growth of Luxembourg. When men went to war or migrated for work, women maintained households, ran small businesses, and kept communities functioning. In rural areas, they managed the land and passed down traditions that defined the national culture. In the cities, they joined emerging industries, worked in textile factories, and later in offices and banks. Their economic contribution was crucial to the transformation of Luxembourg from an agricultural society into an industrial and then financial power. Yet for much of history, this labor was undervalued or ignored. Education played a central role in changing that perception. By the late 19th century, Luxembourg began to expand access to schooling for girls. Religious orders often led these efforts, founding convent schools that taught literacy, domestic skills, and basic sciences. Although these institutions were conservative by modern standards, they gave women tools to navigate a changing world. Some of the first female teachers became local leaders, promoting the idea that women could contribute intellectually as well as morally. Gradually, this shift opened the way for women to enter professions and public service. The path was slow and uneven, but it marked a quiet revolution in the national mindset. In the 20th century, the influence of women became more visible in politics and culture. After gaining the right to vote, Luxembourgish women began participating in local councils and national debates. Some entered journalism, literature, and academia, offering perspectives that had long been missing from public conversation. Writers and artists drew inspiration from the country's complex history, exploring themes of identity, migration, and belonging. Female voices added depth to this exploration, reminding readers that Luxembourg was not only a land of bankers and bureaucrats, but also a place of human stories and emotional resilience. Still, the image of Luxembourg as a male-driven powerhouse persisted abroad. Its banking sector, diplomatic corps, and government often appeared dominated by men in suits. Yet if one looks more closely, the fingerprints of women are everywhere. They helped shape education policy, environmental reforms, and international relations. Grand Duchess Josephine Charlotte, who served alongside Grand Duke Jean, carried on the tradition of public service through her support of humanitarian causes. She worked quietly but effectively, building connections between Luxembourg and organizations across Europe. Her daughter, Grand Duchess Maria Theresa, has continued that legacy, focusing on social inclusion, children's rights, and global solidarity. Through their work, the modern duchesses have shown that influence can be exercised with compassion rather than authority. Luxembourg's progress toward equality has also been driven by ordinary citizens. The rise of women's associations, trade unions, and advocacy groups throughout the 20th century gave structure to collective action. These groups pushed for workplace rights, family benefits, and better representation. They helped shape policies that today rank Luxembourg among the most equitable societies in Europe. This social progress did not erase the past. Rather, it fulfilled the potential planted by generations of women who held families, estates, and communities together in harder times. When viewed across the centuries, a pattern emerges. Luxembourg's women, from noble duchesses to working mothers, have always responded to crisis with resilience. In medieval times, they guarded inheritance and negotiated peace. In modern times, they guided recovery and reform. Their methods differed, but their purpose was similar: to preserve the integrity of a small land caught between greater powers. This continuity explains why Luxembourg's identity feels both stable and adaptable. It is not built solely on economic success, but on the quiet strength of those who refused to let it disappear. To uncover these hidden histories, one must look beyond traditional archives. Letters, diaries, church records, and oral traditions reveal a web of female influence that official documents rarely acknowledge. Some of these stories are personal, even intimate. A widow managing her farm during the 30 Years' War. A nun hiding refugees during the Second World War. A teacher in the early 20th century helping rural girls learn to read. Each example may seem small, but together they form a collective narrative of endurance and care. This is the foundation upon which Luxembourg's modern reputation stands, even if it is rarely mentioned in corporate reports or diplomatic speeches. The story of overlooked duchesses is also a story about the nature of power itself. In Luxembourg, where direct rule was often constrained by larger neighbors, influence often mattered more than authority. Women, who lacked formal power, learned to use influence effectively. They built alliances, mediated conflicts, and maintained stability through persuasion and example. This approach shaped the political culture of the country, which still values compromise and cooperation over confrontation. The national motto, "We want to remain what we are," captures this quiet strength. It reflects a heritage of survival through adaptability, a trait first practiced by the duchesses who ruled without armies or vast resources. The interplay between visibility and invisibility is key to understanding Luxembourg's evolution. The men who signed treaties and commanded troops often depended on the behind-the-scenes work of women who kept the machinery of governance intact. Even today, when gender equality has advanced, much of the essential labor that sustains the country, education, healthcare, family care, is still performed largely by women. Recognizing this continuity does not diminish the achievements of modern Luxembourg. It deepens them by connecting the present to the past. Looking forward, the legacy of those hidden histories offers valuable lessons. It reminds modern societies that progress depends not only on innovation and wealth, but also on empathy, persistence, and balance. The duchesses of old Luxembourg did not seek fame, yet their actions built the framework within which later leaders could act. They turned vulnerability into strength, using diplomacy instead of conquest, and patience instead of force. In an era when small states are once again navigating global uncertainty, their example remains relevant. Luxembourg's familiar image, a prosperous, efficient multilingual hub, owes much to the foundations laid by these forgotten figures. Their influence can be traced in the country's strong institutions, its commitment to social welfare, and its ability to mediate between cultures. Every treaty signed, Every reform enacted carries echoes of their pragmatic vision. They taught their successors that leadership is not measured by dominance, but by endurance and care for one's people. Their story is not one of lost glory, but of continuity and quiet achievement. To unveil this history is to see Luxembourg anew. It is to understand that the strength of a nation can grow from the invisible labor of those who never sought recognition. The duchesses who once managed lands, the grand duchesses who inspired through moral authority, and the countless women who sustained families and traditions together shaped a national character defined by steadiness and mutual respect. Their influence crosses time, linking medieval fortresses to modern skyscrapers, feudal households to parliamentary chambers. In their lives, the personal and political merged seamlessly, proving that even the smallest country can produce greatness when guided by conscience and resolve. Luxembourg today continues to honor this legacy, whether through education, cultural preservation, or social policy. The country's emphasis on community values, its careful diplomacy, and its inclusive identity are not new inventions. They are modern expressions of lessons learned over centuries from women who led without title and ruled without force. Their hidden histories, once brought to light, reveal that behind every prosperous nation lies a foundation built on the quiet labor of those who refused to disappear into silence. By remembering them, Luxembourg not only reclaims its full story, but also sets an example for other nations seeking strength in their own overlooked pasts. The story of Luxembourg's duchesses is not just about individuals. It is about a spirit that transcends time, the belief that integrity, patience, and compassion can shape history as powerfully as wealth or might. This spirit continues to define the nation. It flows through its institutions, its diplomacy, and its people. Beneath the polished image of a modern financial hub lies a deep well of endurance, carved by women who turned the margins of history into its most lasting chapters. Their legacy is not hidden anymore. It lives on in the way Luxembourg stands today. Small but steadfast, modern yet mindful of its roots, shaped by the quiet strength of those who came before. The women who laid Luxembourg's foundations did more than govern. They transformed a vulnerable region into a resilient state. Their influence extended far beyond the private chambers of power. Among them were leaders whose strategic minds earned them respect equal to their male counterparts. They were empresses, negotiators, and diplomats who turned fragile alliances into enduring sovereignty. Their lives reveal the complex interplay between personal will and national destiny, proving that leadership in Luxembourg's history was never defined by gender, but by capability and vision. One of the earliest and most remarkable figures in this long lineage was Countess Ermesinde of Luxembourg. Her story captures both the fragility and the promise of the medieval duchy. Born into a fractured inheritance, Ermesinde faced a challenge that could have destroyed her family's claim to power. Her father's rule had left Luxembourg weakened, and male rivals were eager to absorb its lands. Yet Ermesinde was not content to accept decline. Through careful negotiation and steady leadership, she restored and expanded the duchy's borders. She used her intelligence rather than military force, securing treaties that preserved Luxembourg's autonomy. Her rule proved that political success could be achieved through persistence and diplomacy instead of conquest. Ermesinde's strength lay in her ability to read people as much as she read situations. In a time when noble women were often married off to serve dynastic interests, she turned marriage into a tool of strategy rather than subjugation. By aligning with partners who respected her authority, she maintained control over her territories. She restructured local governance, encouraged the growth of towns, and issued charters that protected trade. These acts, while modest in appearance, created the economic and civic foundation on which later rulers built. Her legacy reached far beyond her own generation, shaping Luxembourg's political identity for centuries. Ermesinde's name may not appear as often as those of kings or emperors, but her imprint is visible in the very survival of the nation she defended. In later centuries, the duchy would face new tests of endurance. Dynastic conflicts, religious wars, and imperial ambitions constantly threatened its existence. Yet time and again, women rose to positions where their choices determined the country's fate. One such figure was Sophie of Nassau, a woman whose life demonstrates the art of political calculation in an era dominated by powerful neighbors. As a member of the House of Nassau, she understood that Luxembourg's independence depended on skillful diplomacy. She mastered the balance between yielding and asserting, knowing when to negotiate and when to stand firm. Through a series of well-judged alliances and correspondences, she helped maintain the delicate autonomy of the Grand Duchy during times when larger states sought to absorb it completely. Sophie's approach to politics was both practical and visionary. She grasped the importance of unity within diversity. Luxembourg, with its mix of languages and influences, could not survive through brute force. It had to rely on persuasion, flexibility, and careful management of relationships. Sophie recognized that strength did not mean isolation. It meant interdependence managed on equal terms. Her insight prefigured the cooperative mindset that later became the hallmark of Luxembourg's diplomacy within Europe. She believed in preserving independence not by resisting change, but by guiding it. In this sense, she was a political chess master, anticipating moves and countermoves with precision. Beyond her political role, Sophie of Nassau also advanced economic modernization. She supported infrastructure improvements and educational initiatives, understanding that national security rested not only on armies or treaties, but on the prosperity and intelligence of the people. She encouraged reforms that opened more opportunities for women in education and social work, planting the seeds for the gender equality Luxembourg enjoys today. Her legacy, though sometimes overshadowed by the Grand Dukes of her time, was instrumental in stabilizing the nation during a period of rapid change. She embodied the fusion of strength and empathy that defines the country's enduring spirit. While figures like Ermesinde and Sophie demonstrated the strategic side of leadership, other duchesses and noble women revealed the power of resilience in crisis. Many of them were forced into leadership by circumstance rather than choice. Wars, plagues, and political turmoil often left them widowed or in charge of territories under siege. Yet instead of yielding to despair, they stepped forward to manage defense, organize relief, and sustain morale. Their actions rarely earned them fame, but they ensured survival. These women were not only consorts but commanders in their own right, wielding authority with a quiet but firm hand. Among these determined figures, one finds examples of women who influenced even the military decisions of their time. Though rarely leading armies directly, they funded defenses, arranged supplies, and managed the logistics that kept soldiers fed and equipped. They also used networks of correspondence to gather intelligence and negotiate truces. Their ability to mediate between conflicting parties often prevented greater destruction. In a small land like Luxembourg, where every border carried strategic weight, such mediation was as valuable as any victory in battle. The duchesses' strength lay not in the sword, but in their intellect and their capacity to turn rivals into allies. The legacy of these Iron Ladies shaped the nation's political temperament. They taught future generations that power could be expressed through restraint as much as through assertion. Luxembourg's preference for consensus and its reputation for neutrality in modern times owe much to these early lessons. The duchess's influence instilled a sense of measured judgment in the political culture, a belief that survival comes not from domination but from cooperation and balance. They transformed vulnerability into a form of strength that became the country's hallmark. Their impact also extended to cultural and social life. Through patronage of art, music, and learning, these women helped nurture a shared identity among people of different origins. In their courts, languages mingled and ideas flourished. They invited artists, scholars, and theologians to their circles, creating spaces where creativity could thrive even during turbulent times. These cultural investments may not have appeared as grand as wars or conquests, but they built the intellectual fabric of Luxembourg. The duchesses understood that a nation's spirit is sustained not only by its borders, but by the imagination and values of its people. Over the centuries, the spirit of these women evolved but never disappeared. Each era brought new challenges, and with them new forms of leadership. In the age of industrialization, Luxembourg transformed from a rural land into a modern economy. As men worked in mines and factories, women again became the stabilizing force of society. They managed households, educated children, and participated in community life, maintaining the nation's social cohesion. Though their contributions were less visible than those of the ruling duchesses, they carried the same essence of strength and determination. They were the quiet heirs of Ermesinde and Sophie, keeping the nation grounded as it raced toward modernity. By the time Luxembourg entered the 20th century, the idea of female influence had deep roots in its culture. The monarchy, though symbolic, continued to embody the values of unity and compassion that earlier duchesses had championed. Grand Duchess Charlotte carried this tradition with extraordinary grace. Her wartime leadership reflected the same moral courage that Ermesinde showed in defending her inheritance. Like Sophie of Nassau, she relied on diplomacy and communication rather than force. Her exile broadcasts during the Second World War echoed the voices of those earlier women who had guided the nation through turmoil. She reminded her people that faith and perseverance could outlast even occupation and despair. Charlotte's reign marked a turning point in how Luxembourg understood leadership. Her example blurred the line between royal duty and civic responsibility. She encouraged modernization, supported education, and promoted women's participation in society. Her actions continued the legacy of the Iron Ladies, who had governed through wisdom rather than aggression. The endurance of her influence after her abdication proved that leadership rooted in empathy leaves a mark that time cannot erase. Her successors carried her spirit forward, demonstrating that strength in Luxembourg's history has always been inseparable from compassion. Even in contemporary times, this lineage of resilient women continues. Grand Duchess Maria Theresa has carried the torch with her advocacy for human rights, equality, and global solidarity. Her initiatives to combat poverty and social exclusion echo the moral commitment of her predecessors. In many ways, she personifies the modern form of the same strength that guided Ermesinde and Sophie. The belief that leadership means service, and that service requires both intellect and heart. Through her international work, she has shown that the small nation of Luxembourg can wield moral influence far beyond its size, much as the duchesses once did through their diplomatic networks. The story of Luxembourg's Iron Ladies is therefore not only historical but deeply symbolic. It reveals how the nation's resilience stems from a tradition of strategic thought, quiet power, and unwavering moral conviction. These women were not anomalies. They were the pillars upon which the country's identity was built. Their approach to leadership, rooted in communication, adaptability, and long-term vision, continues to define Luxembourg's place in the modern world. Whether in royal palaces or civic offices, the legacy of female influence remains a living force that shapes the country's policies and values. In exploring their stories, one also sees how they redefined femininity itself. In a patriarchal world, they proved that intelligence, diplomacy, and courage were not male domains. They balanced duty and independence with remarkable skill, showing that leadership could coexist with compassion. Their power was neither ostentatious nor fragile. It was grounded in practicality and sustained by conviction. Through centuries of upheaval, they demonstrated that strength is not measured by aggression, but by the ability to endure, adapt, and inspire others to do the same. Their contributions also challenged the very idea of what it meant to rule. Many of them governed in the absence of formal authority, using persuasion and example rather than decree. They relied on alliances built on trust and respect rather than fear. This form of leadership, though subtle, proved more durable than many empires of their time. It created a legacy of governance that valued integrity over ambition and unity over division. In this sense, the duchesses and countesses of Luxembourg were ahead of their age, anticipating modern concepts of leadership rooted in cooperation and empathy. To understand Luxembourg's modern stability and prosperity, one must trace it back to these foundations. The country's diplomatic strength, its reputation for fairness, and its ability to mediate international disputes are all reflections of lessons learned from these women. They taught that neutrality is not weakness but wisdom, and that dialogue achieves what force cannot. Their influence reaches even into the structure of contemporary Luxembourgish society, where collaboration and mutual respect are central to both politics and daily life. Their stories also carry a universal message about the nature of influence. True power often works unseen, shaping events from behind the curtain. The Duchesses of Luxembourg understood this long before it became a political theory. They mastered the art of subtle control, using networks of loyalty and communication to achieve stability. Their quiet methods preserved a nation surrounded by giants. In today's interconnected world, where soft power often matters more than hard force, their example feels surprisingly modern. Yet for centuries, their contributions were neglected in mainstream histories. Chroniclers focused on battles, treaties, and the deeds of men, leaving the achievements of women in the margins. Only in recent decades have historians begun to re-examine their roles, piecing together fragments from letters, decrees, and local records. What emerges from this research is a narrative of continuity, one that reveals Luxembourg as a nation shaped as much by intellect and compassion as by strategy and economics. The rediscovery of these women's stories restores balance to the national memory, giving voice to those who quietly built the state's foundations. Their endurance through time also offers insight into how nations evolve. Luxembourg's survival as an independent country was never guaranteed. Surrounded by powerful neighbors, it could easily have been absorbed or erased. That it remained distinct owes much to the steady hands of women who preserved its spirit even when borders shifted. They kept alive the idea of Luxembourg as a coherent community with its own identity, faith, and purpose. In this sense, they were not only rulers but guardians of continuity, passing down a legacy that still guides the country today. The Iron Ladies of Luxembourg remind us that history is not written only by conquerors. It is also shaped by those who preserve, nurture, and rebuild. They show that leadership takes many forms and that moral courage can be as transformative as military might. Their example continues to resonate in a world where quiet leadership is often undervalued. They teach that strength does not always shout. Sometimes it speaks softly and endures longer. From Ermesinde's defense of her inheritance to Sophie of Nassau's strategic foresight, from Grand Duchess Charlotte's wartime resilience to Maria Theresa's humanitarian work, each of these women carried forward the same flame. They forged a lineage of endurance that turned a small duchy into a modern symbol of stability. Their stories weave together a single narrative of persistence and principle. They did not merely survive history. They defined it, proving that the power to shape nations often lies in unseen hands guided by vision and conviction. Their legacy endures in the Luxembourg of today, prosperous, multilingual, and deeply rooted in values of cooperation and equality. The skyscrapers that rise above the old fortress stand as symbols not only of economic success but also of continuity, the triumph of intellect, diplomacy, and faith in human capacity. The duchesses who once ruled from stone halls and candlelit chambers would recognize in this modern landscape the same spirit they embodied, a belief that true power is the ability to endure with dignity and to lead through understanding rather than fear. In remembering them, Luxembourg remembers itself. As the centuries unfolded, the women who had once defended Luxembourg through diplomacy and strength of character began to influence it in new ways. Their roles shifted from guardians of sovereignty to architects of identity. Having secured the nation's survival, they now sought to shape its soul. Their impact went far beyond court politics and dynastic intrigue. Through art, architecture, education, and social reform, they laid the groundwork for the Luxembourg we recognize today. These duchesses and grand duchesses were not content to wear crowns. They built institutions, defined taste, and nurtured a sense of national belonging that reached every level of society. In this next stage of the story, the line between ruler and visionary became indistinct. The Duchesses of Luxembourg began to view culture not as a luxury, but as a form of leadership. One of the earliest and most influential figures in this transformation was Elisabeth of Austria, whose marriage linked the Habsburg and Luxembourgish lines. Though her life unfolded within the complex politics of imperial Europe, her influence reached deeply into the artistic and cultural life of the duchy. Elisabeth understood the power of beauty and order in defining a nation's image. She used art and architecture as subtle tools of diplomacy and identity building. Her patronage of artisans, painters, and architects reshaped the visual language of the region. Under her influence, Gothic structures were renovated, chapels adorned with new frescoes, and music cultivated at court. These acts were not mere displays of wealth, but expressions of unity and faith. At a time when Europe's borders shifted constantly, culture provided a sense of permanence. Elizabeth's courts became meeting places for creative minds who blended local and foreign styles, giving Luxembourg a distinct voice within the greater European chorus. Her vision turned the small duchy into a microcosm of refinement and innovation. Art was more than decoration for these women. It was a statement of values. Elisabeth and others like her understood that a people's identity is written not only in their laws, but in their symbols. By fostering artistic expression, they gave Luxembourgers a shared sense of pride. The cathedrals, palaces, and manuscripts commissioned during their reigns still bear witness to this cultural flowering. The intertwining of faith, artistry, and governance under their guidance helped define the moral tone of the nation. The duchesses transformed Luxembourg from a battleground into a beacon of creativity. While the cultural influence of women, such as Elisabeth of Austria, shaped the spiritual and aesthetic face of Luxembourg, their economic impact was equally profound. Many of these duchesses became the quiet architects of trade and industry, guiding the duchy toward stability and prosperity. The transition from a feudal economy to one rooted in commerce and craftsmanship required careful management. Resources had to be protected, routes maintained, and taxes balanced. Women often handled these responsibilities while their husbands engaged in military or diplomatic affairs. Through household management and estate oversight, the duchesses developed a keen understanding of economics. They encouraged the growth of local markets, improved agricultural production, and supported guilds that brought structure to trade. Their letters and records show attention to detail in matters of finance, often more precise than those of their male counterparts. They recognized that economic strength meant political survival. By promoting fair trade and supporting infrastructure such as roads and bridges, they connected Luxembourg to the broader European economy. In this way, they laid the foundations for the commercial dynamism that would later make the country a financial powerhouse. Their influence extended beyond simple management. Some duchesses actively invested in mining and metallurgy, early industries that transformed the landscape of Luxembourg. They granted charters to miners, regulated forest use, and encouraged innovations in production. These efforts supported the later rise of steel manufacturing, which became central to Luxembourg's identity in the modern age. Though they could not have foreseen the scale of industrialization to come, their foresight created the conditions that allowed it to flourish. At the same time, their patronage of craftsmanship supported artistic trades that blended utility and beauty. Lace-making, textile production, and fine metalwork, all nurtured under the watchful eyes of the duchesses, brought both income and cultural prestige. The combination of artistry and enterprise became a national hallmark. Even centuries later, Luxembourg's balance between cultural refinement and economic precision can be traced back to the values these women instilled. They believed that prosperity should serve the community, not merely the elite. Beyond economics and culture, the duchesses and grand duchesses of Luxembourg also transformed society through education and charity. Their reforms often began as acts of compassion, but evolved into lasting institutions. In a period when public welfare barely existed, they established schools, hospitals, and orphanages. Their motivations were rooted in faith, but guided by a practical understanding of social order. Educated and healthy citizens made a stronger nation. One of the most important developments came from their advocacy for female education. Convents and charitable foundations under their protection offered instruction in reading, writing, and arithmetic, skills that gave women and girls new forms of independence. These programs, though limited by the norms of their times, laid the groundwork for broader educational reforms in the centuries ahead. The duchesses believed that knowledge was not only a privilege, but a responsibility. They viewed learning as essential to moral improvement and civic duty. Their vision planted the seeds of Luxembourg's modern commitment to universal education. Charity also became a means of social reform. The duchesses' patronage of hospitals introduced better care for the poor and sick, long before organized medicine emerged. They funded housing for widows, relief for refugees, and alms for struggling families. While much of this was carried out through religious institutions, the guiding impulse came from their leadership. These women moved philanthropy from sporadic generosity to structured service. They turned compassion into policy, showing that empathy could be institutionalized. In doing so, they also redefined the role of women in public life. The duchesses demonstrated that social influence was not confined to the private sphere. Their actions bridged the gap between monarchy and common life, linking the court to the needs of ordinary people. They walked among their subjects, listening to grievances and responding with practical measures. This human approach helped legitimize their authority and fostered loyalty. The people saw in them not distant rulers, but caretakers of the community. As the Enlightenment began to spread across Europe, Luxembourg's duchesses adapted to the changing intellectual climate. They encouraged scientific inquiry, promoted literacy, and invited scholars to their courts. Some corresponded with philosophers, supporting debates on governance and ethics. While cautious not to challenge traditional faith, they recognized that reason and education could strengthen society. Their patronage of knowledge helped ease the transition from medieval hierarchy to modern citizenship. Their progressive ideas extended to the arts as well. Under their influence, architecture evolved from fortress-like castles to elegant residences that symbolized peace and refinement. Gardens were designed to reflect harmony between nature and human order. These changes were more than aesthetic, they reflected a deeper shift in worldview. The duchesses of this era saw themselves as stewards of both land and people, responsible for maintaining balance and beauty in all things. The 18th and 19th centuries brought even greater transformation. Industrialization and political reform swept across Europe, challenging old structures of power. Luxembourg's women once again adapted, translating their traditional roles into new forms of leadership. Grand Duchess Charlotte's later emphasis on education and welfare had its roots in the social conscience cultivated by her predecessors. The duchesses who came before her had already established the expectation that rulers must serve their people, not merely govern them. Even in the early days of industry, women continued to shape economic policy indirectly. Their patronage of schools of commerce, art, and domestic science prepared citizens for a changing world. They supported training in trades that combined craftsmanship and modern technique. This practical vision helped Luxembourg transition smoothly into the industrial age. The duchesses were not sentimental about the past. They valued progress when it served the common good. Their legacy also influenced how Luxembourg responded to urbanization. As towns expanded and social problems multiplied, the duchesses and later grand duchesses promoted housing reforms, sanitation improvements, and access to healthcare. Their emphasis on dignity and human welfare prevented the worst excesses of industrial exploitation. In this sense, they anticipated social policies that would later define the welfare state. Their belief that prosperity must be shared continues to shape Luxembourg's national ethos. While their economic and social contributions are easier to document, their cultural legacy remains perhaps the most profound. The duchesses nurtured a uniquely Luxembourgish identity that balanced regional influences with local pride. Surrounded by powerful neighbors, the country could have easily lost its distinct voice. Instead, it developed a cultural identity that valued multilingualism, tolerance, and creativity. The seeds of this openness were sown in the courts and schools they supported. By fostering art and education that welcomed both native and foreign ideas, the duchesses created a national character rooted in inclusivity. Their approach to culture also bridged the divide between elite and popular traditions. They celebrated folk music, local crafts, and seasonal festivals alongside the refined arts of court life. This balance between sophistication and simplicity gave Luxembourg a cohesive identity that transcended class and region. It also reflected the duchesses' understanding of leadership as service rather than display. They did not seek to separate themselves from the people, but to represent them. Even architecture carried this message. The churches, civic halls, and bridges built under their guidance were designed to endure. They symbolized both faith and progress. Each structure stood as a reminder that beauty and utility could coexist. The duchesses believed that good design uplifted the human spirit and fostered civic pride. Their attention to detail in public works inspired later generations of architects and planners who continued to shape Luxembourg's urban landscape. By the dawn of the 20th century, their influence had become woven into the nation's fabric. Luxembourg's strong educational system, its dedication to culture, and its commitment to social justice all trace back to the initiatives of these women. They turned the duties of monarchy into instruments of national development. Their combination of moral conviction and administrative skill set standards that even democratic leaders later followed. The Duchess's story also reveals the broader truth that leadership is not limited by gender, but by imagination. They used the tools available to them, faith, art, wealth, and influence, to build something lasting. Each generation reinterpreted that role in light of new challenges. Some focused on charity, others on diplomacy or education, but all shared the same purpose: to strengthen Luxembourg through service. Their work resonates today in the country's continued investment in culture and welfare. Luxembourg's museums, libraries, and universities are modern expressions of the vision first articulated in medieval convents and Renaissance courts. Its balanced economy, which values social responsibility alongside profit, reflects the Duchess's belief that prosperity must uplift all. And its civic harmony, rooted in equality and respect, echoes the compassion that guided their rule. The impact of these women extends far beyond the borders of Luxembourg. Their lives challenge the traditional narrative of European history, which often overlooks the contributions of women in shaping modern states. They demonstrate that soft power, expressed through education, culture, and social care, can achieve what wars and treaties cannot. Their influence shows how moral authority, exercised with patience and foresight, can secure both stability and progress. To view Luxembourg's history only through the lens of its financial and political achievements would be to miss its heart. The duchesses who ruled, advised, and inspired across the centuries infused the nation with purpose and humanity. They created the traditions of fairness, diligence, and solidarity that still define its people. Their legacy is not confined to monuments or archives. It lives in the everyday life of the country they helped build. The transformation they guided, from fortress to cultural crossroads, from feudal estate to modern state, was driven by a belief in harmony. They saw no contradiction between progress and tradition, power and compassion, faith and reason. Their balanced vision allowed Luxembourg to thrive where others faltered. In every era, they proved that leadership rooted in empathy could achieve lasting results. Today, as Luxembourg continues to evolve in an interconnected world, the lessons of its duchesses remain relevant. The modern nation, with its global outlook and strong sense of community, stands as a tribute to their foresight. The schools that educate future generations, the cultural institutions that preserve heritage, and the policies that protect social welfare all trace back to their influence. These achievements confirm that the strength of a country is not measured by size or wealth, but by the character of its people, and that character was shaped, in large part, by women who believed in the power of care, intellect, and vision. In reflecting on their legacy, one realizes that the Duchesses of Luxembourg were more than historical figures. They were architects of continuity. Through culture, economy, and social reform, they transformed a fragile territory into a thriving nation. They understood that progress must be grounded in humanity, and that leadership must always serve the common good. Their quiet revolution unfolded not through conquest, but through compassion, not through power, but through purpose. From Elisabeth of Austria's patronage of art to the economic foresight of later Grand Duchesses, from the charitable foundations of the Middle Ages to the social reforms of the modern era, their influence forms a single unbroken thread through Luxembourg's history. It is a thread woven with patience, wisdom, and love of country, a testament to the enduring truth that the most profound change often begins beyond the gown, in the steady hands of those who build, nurture, and inspire. The legacy of Luxembourg's duchesses did not end with their lifetimes. Their work continues to breathe quietly through the rhythms of modern Luxembourg. The spirit that shaped their actions, the balance of wisdom, empathy, and resolve, still defines the way this small country engages with the world. Each generation has found new meaning in their lessons, translating the grace and pragmatism of these women into modern forms of leadership. What began as royal duty has become a national character, built on the conviction that progress must be thoughtful, inclusive, and humane. To understand Luxembourg today, one must see the country not only through the gleam of its banks or the precision of its bureaucracy, but through the deeper values that underlie its stability. Those values did not emerge by chance. They are the living reflection of centuries of female leadership that prized unity over ambition and dialogue over dominance. The duchesses and grand duchesses of earlier centuries faced crises not unlike those that challenge modern Luxembourg. How to remain independent in a world of giants, how to protect identity in an age of globalization, and how to maintain fairness while pursuing prosperity. Their answers, rooted in balance and moral clarity, remain just as relevant today. Luxembourg's success in the modern era mirrors the same qualities that defined its earliest female leaders. It is small but influential, confident but never arrogant, rich yet socially conscious. Its ability to mediate between nations and to build consensus in complex situations recalls the diplomatic tact of Sophie of Nassau and the foresight of Ermesinde. The Duchess's legacy lives in the country's political temperament, which favors conversation and cooperation over confrontation. In an age of rising polarization, Luxembourg's calm persistence feels like a direct inheritance from the steady patience of those who once guided it through turmoil. The Duchess's belief in education as the foundation of progress also echoes across the nation's institutions. Luxembourg's modern commitment to schooling, research, and multilingual learning is not simply a policy choice, but a continuation of their vision. The early convent schools and charitable academies that they established became the seeds of a system that values both intellect and equality. Today, Luxembourg invests heavily in education not only to strengthen its economy, but to nurture citizens capable of empathy and critical thought. This approach reflects the Duchesses' understanding that knowledge is both a right and a responsibility, a means of personal growth and national service. In the realm of culture, too, their influence remains unmistakable. The country's investment in museums, theaters, and heritage sites stems from the example set by Elisabeth of Austria and her successors, who viewed art as a unifying force. Luxembourg's cultural institutions continue to celebrate diversity, echoing the Duchess's belief that creativity flourishes through openness. Whether in the Philharmonic Concert Hall or the National Museum of History and Art, the same guiding principle endures. Beauty and intellect are instruments of connection. The modern Luxembourgish identity, cosmopolitan yet rooted, elegant yet understated, owes much to the values that these women embedded in national life. Their approach to leadership also prefigured the social model that Luxembourg upholds today. The Duchesses understood that stability depends on justice, and justice requires compassion. The welfare programs and social protections that define the nation's modern prosperity reflect the same moral foundation that guided their charitable work centuries earlier. When Grand Duchess Charlotte supported relief efforts after the war, she followed a path first walked by women who founded hospitals and orphanages in medieval times. When Grand Duchess Maria Theresa advocates for vulnerable groups today, she continues a tradition that began with her predecessor's commitment to mercy as a form of governance. The Duchesses taught Luxembourg that leadership is not power over others, but care for others. Modern Luxembourg also mirrors their belief in inclusivity. From the earliest duchesses who welcomed artisans and scholars from other lands to the contemporary nation that thrives on multiculturalism, the pattern is clear. These women understood that diversity was not a threat, but a source of strength. Their courts were crossroads of languages and ideas, much like today's Luxembourg, where people from every continent live and work together. This enduring openness is one of the country's greatest assets, making it a model of coexistence in an increasingly divided world. In its economic philosophy, Luxembourg also bears their imprint. The duchesses who nurtured trade and craftsmanship taught that wealth should serve purpose. Their attention to fairness and community responsibility still guides national policy. The modern state's emphasis on ethical governance, environmental care, and social investment reflects the same principle. Prosperity must uplift all, not just a few. The balance between financial sophistication and moral duty is no accident. It is the natural evolution of a mindset rooted in centuries of responsible stewardship. The influence of these women extends even into Luxembourg's diplomacy. Their legacy of patience and negotiation shaped a national identity built on trust. As early duchesses once mediated disputes between rival lords, modern Luxembourg serves as a bridge within the European Union and beyond. Its diplomats and leaders are known for clarity, discretion, and empathy, the same qualities that once defined the Duchess's rule. The nation's reputation for quiet effectiveness on the world stage echoes the refined strength of those who led not through force, but through understanding. Even the nation's architecture carries traces of their vision. The mix of medieval fortresses and modern glass towers reflects the duality they embodied, rooted in history yet open to progress. Many of the civic buildings and cultural landmarks owe their existence to traditions of public service and aesthetic care that began under their patronage. The emphasis on urban planning, sustainability, and preservation that defines contemporary Luxembourg follows their belief that beauty and function must coexist. Each restored church, each well-tended garden, each thoughtfully designed public square pays silent tribute to the duchesses who saw harmony as a civic virtue. Their unseen monuments are not only physical, but also institutional. The legal and administrative structures that make Luxembourg one of the world's most stable nations carry their moral signature. The Duchess's insistence on fairness and consultation shaped an enduring culture of good governance. The collaborative style of leadership found in Luxembourgish politics, the preference for coalition, dialogue, and gradual reform, owes much to their example. They taught that lasting progress arises from inclusion and patience, not decree. Their influence lingers in every council meeting where consensus is prized above partisanship. Perhaps the most subtle yet profound expression of their legacy lies in Luxembourg's social character. The country's people, known for modesty, diligence, and quiet pride, mirror the temperament of their historical heroines. The duchesses never ruled through display or extravagance. They led through competence and conviction. That same understated strength defines Luxembourg today. Its citizens rarely boast of their achievements, yet they maintain one of the highest standards of living in the world. This humility combined with excellence is a cultural inheritance, a reflection of women who understood that dignity needs no spectacle. Their legacy also carries lessons for modern leadership beyond Luxembourg's borders. In an age that often rewards ambition over principle, the Duchesses offer a different model. They remind us that leadership grounded in empathy and restraint can achieve more lasting results than dominance or charisma. Their stories show that power used with conscience creates unity, while power pursued for its own sake breeds division. They exemplify a form of strength that values listening as much as command. In this, they remain models not only for monarchs or politicians, but for anyone who seeks to lead responsibly in any sphere of life. The Duchesses' continued presence in Luxembourg's collective memory demonstrates the importance of reclaiming overlooked histories. For centuries, their contributions were overshadowed by those of men who fought wars or signed treaties. Yet as historians and citizens alike re-examine the past, these women emerge as central figures in the making of the nation. Their rediscovery is not simply an act of justice, it is an act of understanding. By recognizing their role, Luxembourg gains a fuller sense of itself. The nation's story becomes richer and more complete when it acknowledges that its strength was nurtured as much by compassion as by strategy. Their stories also offer a reminder that progress is not linear but cumulative. Each duchess built upon the work of those before her, refining and expanding the meaning of leadership. The compassion of medieval countesses evolved into the social policies of modern grand duchesses. The patronage of art and architecture blossomed into a national culture that celebrates creativity. The emphasis on fairness in governance became the cornerstone of modern democracy. Their influence grew not through revolutions, but through continuity, shaping the soul of Luxembourg one generation at a time. In today's Luxembourg, where equality and civic engagement are central to public life, their spirit is alive in new forms. Women serve as ministers, judges, artists, and entrepreneurs, continuing the legacy of agency and intellect that began in royal courts. The nation's strong record on gender equality is not merely a product of recent reform, but a fulfillment of an older ideal. When Luxembourg promotes inclusion and education, it honors the duchesses who first opened doors to learning. When it supports cultural diversity, it echoes their belief that understanding enriches both ruler and citizen. The connection between past and present becomes especially clear in moments of national reflection. Ceremonies, commemorations, and cultural projects often invoke the memory of the duchesses as symbols of unity and continuity. Their portraits hang in galleries not as relics, but as reminders of enduring values. The nation's schools teach about their achievements, linking history to civic identity. Through these acts of remembrance, Luxembourg ensures that their lessons remain part of everyday life rather than fading into myth. The Duchess's relevance extends even into the challenges of the modern world. Issues such as sustainability, migration, and global inequality demand the same balance of strength and compassion that guided their rule. The Duchesses understood that every decision must weigh material progress against moral consequence. Their emphasis on stewardship of land, wealth, and people speaks directly to contemporary debates about responsible governance. They remind us that true prosperity is measured not by what a nation possesses, but by how it uses its resources for the common good. In a broader sense, their example also speaks to the universal human search for meaning in leadership. They show that authority need not corrupt, that empathy need not weaken resolve, and that tradition can coexist with innovation. Their legacy challenges stereotypes about gender and power, demonstrating that effective governance is not the domain of one sex, but the result of character and wisdom. In reclaiming their stories, Luxembourg reclaims a truth that reaches beyond its borders. The strength of a nation lies as much in its heart as in its might. These women also remind us that influence often works invisibly. Their greatest achievements were not dramatic victories, but enduring systems, schools, laws, values, that continue to shape daily life. The quiet nature of their work makes it easy to overlook, yet its impact has proved more lasting than any conquest. This insight resonates strongly in today's world, where attention often favors spectacle over substance. The Duchesses teach that the most profound legacies are those that require no monuments, because they live within people and institutions. Their unseen monuments are everywhere. They exist in the fairness of Luxembourg's courts, in the accessibility of its education, in the harmony of its urban spaces, and in the civility of its politics. They exist in the empathy with which citizens view social issues, and in the balance the nation maintains between progress and preservation. Every law that protects equality, every policy that promotes social welfare, every cultural event that celebrates diversity can trace its lineage to their values. These are the real monuments, living, evolving, and intertwined with the nation's identity. Remembering the Duchesses also matters because it corrects the imbalance of history. By recovering their stories, Luxembourg acknowledges that progress has many architects. It gives voice to those who worked without glory, yet shaped the country's destiny. This act of remembrance transforms history from a list of events into a living dialogue between past and present. It invites reflection on what kind of leadership the future requires and what values should guide it. The Duchess's example provides a compass for that reflection, pointing toward courage that listens, strength that nurtures, and ambition that serves. Their relevance becomes clearest when one considers Luxembourg's role in the modern world. The nation stands as a bridge in Europe, small in size but vast in influence. Its success as a center of diplomacy, finance, and culture depends on the same qualities that sustained it through centuries of challenge: adaptability, fairness, and humility. These traits are the enduring gifts of its duchesses. They taught Luxembourg that true independence lies not in isolation but in integrity, and that a nation's greatness is measured by its capacity to uplift others. In celebrating them, Luxembourg celebrates the essence of its own story. The Duchesses' lives reveal that history is not only made by dramatic events, but by quiet perseverance. They prove that compassion can shape nations as surely as power can. Their legacy is both ancient and modern, a thread that connects the medieval fortress to the contemporary skyline. It reminds every generation that leadership begins not with authority but with vision, not with privilege but with purpose. Their stories matter because they remind us that progress requires memory. Without remembering those who built with patience and care, the present loses its depth. The Duchesses of Luxembourg gave their country more than survival. They gave it meaning. Their example continues to guide its people toward a future that honors the past while embracing change. They showed that leadership, when rooted in humanity, endures beyond politics, beyond time, and beyond the walls of palaces. As Luxembourg moves forward into an era of new challenges and opportunities, the voices of its duchesses still whisper through its institutions and streets. They speak of fairness, of dignity, of the strength found in restraint. They remind the nation that greatness lies not in expansion, but in harmony. And so their legacy, though centuries old, remains vividly alive. It is carried in the hearts of those who believe that leadership can be both strong and kind, and that the smallest nations, guided by conscience, can hold the greatest lessons for the world. In the enduring calm of Luxembourg's valleys and the quiet order of its cities, one can still sense the presence of those women who once shaped its destiny. Their work continues not in the shadow of monuments, but in the living pulse of the nation they built. The duchesses may belong to history, but their spirit belongs to the present. A reminder that every generation stands on the foundations laid by those who led with wisdom, humility, and faith in the power of good. Their echo, steady and clear, continues to guide Luxembourg as it remains what it has always aspired to be: small in size, vast in heart, and forever defined by the strength of its women. The story of Luxembourg's duchesses is not a tale that ends neatly in the past. Their legacy is not confined to museums or archives, nor does it live only in the echo of old titles and faded portraits. It continues to move quietly through the spirit of modern Luxembourg, shaping how the nation sees itself and how it faces the future. Their influence, once overlooked, has become a call to action for all who wish to understand how strength, grace, and foresight can endure across centuries. The Duchesses of Luxembourg are no longer silent figures in forgotten manuscripts. They have become symbols of continuity and conscience in a rapidly changing world. Their lessons matter, now more than ever, because the challenges of the present mirror those of their time. The duchesses ruled during eras when small nations were constantly tested by larger powers, when survival required both courage and diplomacy, and when leadership demanded a blend of resilience and empathy. Today, Luxembourg stands at a similar crossroads, though in a different form. It must navigate the pressures of globalization, environmental change, and shifting alliances, all while protecting its identity and sense of community. The duchesses taught that strength does not come from dominance but from integrity, and that vision must always serve people, not pride. These principles remain the foundation upon which Luxembourg builds its next chapter. The future of Luxembourg will depend on how well it carries forward the values that these women embodied. Their belief in education as a tool of empowerment continues to guide national priorities. In a world increasingly shaped by technology and information, Luxembourg's commitment to learning and innovation mirrors the Duchess's faith in knowledge as the key to progress. The modern universities, research centers, and cultural institutions that enrich the country today are the natural heirs to the schools, libraries, and patronage of earlier centuries. The Duchesses may not have imagined a world of digital networks and artificial intelligence, yet they would have understood the importance of preparing minds to adapt with wisdom and compassion. They also understood the need to connect the local and the global, a balance that remains essential for Luxembourg's future. As a nation that thrives on international cooperation while cherishing its unique culture, Luxembourg continues to follow their example. The Duchesses built bridges with neighboring regions through diplomacy, marriage, and trade. Today, the country builds bridges through dialogue, investment, and shared values. It has become a hub not only of finance, but of ideas and multicultural exchange. The same spirit of openness that defined the Duchesses' courts now defines the nation's role in Europe and beyond. Luxembourg's continued success will also depend on its ability to uphold fairness and solidarity, principles deeply rooted in the Duchesses' approach to governance. Their sense of responsibility toward the poor, the sick, and the marginalized laid the moral groundwork for a society that values welfare and equality. The country's modern social model, known for its balance between economic efficiency and human care, can be traced back to their understanding that compassion strengthens stability. In a future shaped by automation, demographic change, and environmental stress, that moral clarity will be more vital than ever. The Duchess's belief that leadership must serve people's dignity provides a compass for times when technology and markets threaten to overshadow humanity. The Duchess's legacy also calls for renewed attention to the environment. They ruled lands that were small but fertile, where every river and hill mattered. Their stewardship of nature was practical rather than romantic, yet it reflected a deep respect for the balance between human needs and natural resources. Today, as Luxembourg confronts climate challenges, urban expansion, and sustainability goals, that ancient wisdom has regained urgency. The Duchesses might not have spoken of carbon footprints or renewable energy, but they understood that care for the land was care for the future. The modern policies that promote green energy, responsible urban planning, and environmental preservation are extensions of that same belief. Beyond policy and progress, the Duchesses' stories remind Luxembourg of something even more essential: the power of perspective. History is rarely neutral. It often reflects the voices of those who had the privilege to record it. By rediscovering the women who shaped Luxembourg from behind palace walls, society learns to look beyond the familiar and question what else might have been forgotten. This act of recovery is not only historical but deeply moral. It asks citizens to examine whose stories are still missing from the present narrative, whose labor, creativity, or courage remains unseen. In this sense, exploring hidden histories becomes a form of civic duty. The Duchess's rediscovery encourages everyone to look more closely at the quiet contributors who sustain the world today. The call to explore more hidden histories extends beyond Luxembourg. Every nation has its forgotten architects, women and men who influenced events without recognition. By uncovering their stories, people enrich their understanding of progress and its many forms. The Duchesses of Luxembourg demonstrate that power can be subtle and that influence often works through kindness, education, and vision rather than force. Recognizing this broadens the definition of leadership and honors the many ways in which individuals can shape their societies. It also challenges the assumption that history is made only by those in battlefields or parliaments. The Duchesses prove that history is equally made in classrooms, workshops, hospitals, and homes. Their example also reminds the world that heritage is not static. It evolves through interpretation and engagement. Luxembourg's challenge is not merely to preserve the memory of its duchesses, but to let their principles inform new decisions. This means promoting equality not as an act of correction, but as a continuation of tradition. It means cultivating cultural dialogue and civic responsibility as living values rather than ceremonial gestures. The Duchesses' true legacy lies not in what they accomplished once, but in what their spirit inspires today. Each citizen who acts with integrity, each leader who listens before deciding, Each artist or teacher who uses their work to uplift others continues their mission in a modern form. The Duchesses' influence also points to the importance of resilience. They lived through wars, political upheavals, and personal loss, yet they maintained dignity and purpose. Their strength was neither loud nor brittle. It was flexible, rooted in faith and intelligence. That quality of endurance defines Luxembourg's national character and will guide it through future uncertainties. As the world becomes more volatile, the Duchesses' lesson is clear. Resilience comes not from isolation but from community, not from rigidity but from adaptability. Luxembourg's ability to evolve while remaining true to itself reflects precisely that understanding. Looking to the future, Luxembourg continues to embody the values of these women in both policy and spirit. The nation has transformed from a land of farmers and miners into a leader in technology, sustainability, and finance, yet it remains guided by a sense of collective welfare. This evolution mirrors the Duchesses' vision of progress as something that enhances both material and moral life. Their understanding that leadership requires a balance between vision and humility offers a timeless guide for those shaping the next chapters of Luxembourg's story. The Duchesses' lessons on diplomacy also resonate strongly in the modern world. As international tensions rise and cooperation becomes more fragile, Luxembourg's quiet but firm voice in global affairs reflects their approach. They taught that diplomacy is not about dominance, but about building trust. That legacy is visible in Luxembourg's role as a mediator and advocate for unity within Europe. It is a reminder that even small nations can wield great influence when they act with integrity and purpose. The Duchesses showed that wisdom, not size, determines significance. Their rediscovery has also influenced how Luxembourg views gender and leadership. By acknowledging their contributions, the nation reinforces the idea that women's insights have always been integral to its survival and growth. This awareness strengthens ongoing efforts to promote gender equality in all spheres of public life. Modern Luxembourg, where women hold high offices, run businesses, and shape culture, stands as a living tribute to the Duchesses who paved the way, often without recognition. The lesson here is that equality is not a new invention, but a long-overdue acknowledgement of reality. At the same time, the Duchesses' stories serve as a warning against complacency. They remind Luxembourg that progress must be guarded carefully. The freedoms and stability that define the nation today can only endure if built upon continuous empathy and vigilance. The Duchesses' lives illustrate how easily peace can be threatened when pride or neglect replaces care. In remembering their struggles, Luxembourg is reminded that every generation must earn the right to call itself just and enlightened. The Duchesses' message also speaks to the individual. They show that influence is not limited to those with titles or wealth. Every person has the power to shape the world through choices made with conscience. Their patience, intellect, and generosity illustrate how lasting change often begins in small, deliberate acts. The Duchesses may have wielded authority, but their greatest power came from their understanding of responsibility. This perspective invites every citizen to see themselves as a custodian of their community, capable of making quiet yet meaningful contributions. As Luxembourg looks ahead, its path remains intertwined with theirs. The Duchesses' values, education, fairness, resilience, and empathy, are not relics of a distant past, but tools for building a humane future. Their stories encourage the nation to approach progress with moral clarity and to measure success by the well-being of its people. They teach that true advancement lies in balance, between tradition and innovation, between prosperity and justice, between national pride and global responsibility. In honoring them, Luxembourg commits not only to remembering, but to evolving with purpose. The enduring spirit of the Duchesses can be seen in the country's cultural confidence. Luxembourg may be small in geography, but it holds an expansive sense of identity, one that values both roots and openness. This blend reflects the Duchesses' understanding that identity is strengthened by exchange, not weakened by it. The nation's continued investment in cultural diplomacy, education, and sustainable growth shows that their ideals still guide its choices. Each initiative that promotes cooperation or creativity carries the trace of their legacy. Their timeless influence also lies in the power of narrative itself. Stories shape how people perceive themselves and their potential. For too long, history has been told as a series of grand events, leaving little space for the quiet architects of progress. The Duchesses' rediscovery shows that history can be more inclusive, more human. By telling their stories, Luxembourg invites others to do the same, to seek the missing voices in their own histories, to see leadership in unexpected places, and to understand that every society is richer when it acknowledges the full spectrum of those who built it. The Duchess's endurance through centuries of obscurity underscores another lesson. That truth cannot remain buried forever. With patience, history always reveals those who shaped it in silence. Their re-emergence into the public imagination symbolizes a broader awakening, a recognition that understanding the past requires listening to every voice. Their lives are proof that memory, once revived, has the power to transform both identity and future. Luxembourg's journey forward will continue to reflect their spirit, whether consciously or not. Each time the nation chooses dialogue over division, education over ignorance, or fairness over expedience, it honors their wisdom. Each act of inclusion, each commitment to sustainability or justice, extends their legacy into new forms. They may have lived in castles and ruled over medieval lands, but their ideals belong fully to the modern world. Their story ends not with closure but with renewal. The Duchesses of Luxembourg stand as bridges between the past and the future, reminding all who follow that leadership begins with vision and endures through care. They teach that progress is not measured by speed but by depth, not by conquest but by understanding. Their resilience, born of centuries past, continues to light Luxembourg's path as it builds a future defined by balance, justice, and heart. The call to action they leave behind is clear. Keep exploring the hidden corners of history. Keep questioning what has been accepted as the whole story. Keep listening for the voices that history has tried to silence. In doing so, we not only honor the Duchesses of Luxembourg, but all those whose quiet strength shaped the world we inherit. The work they began is not complete. It continues each time someone chooses to lead with empathy, to act with integrity, or to remember that influence need not shout to be profound. The Duchesses' lessons endure because they speak to the core of what it means to build a meaningful life and a just society. They remind us that resilience is not only about survival, but about preserving dignity through adversity. They show that influence, when grounded in purpose, transcends time. Their presence within Luxembourg's identity is not symbolic but practical. It offers a model of how values can anchor progress in an uncertain world. And so, as Luxembourg moves confidently into the future, the Duchesses remain its invisible guardians. Their stories, once hidden, now serve as foundations for reflection and renewal. They remind the nation that greatness lies not in dominance but in understanding, not in isolation but in unity. Their courage, compassion, and wisdom have become timeless guides for leadership and citizenship alike. The Duchesses of Luxembourg were more than figures of their age. They were architects of a national spirit that continues to evolve. Their influence has outlived dynasties and political shifts because it is rooted in universal truths. That kindness is strength, that learning is freedom, and that justice is the measure of all power. As their voices rise again from history's silence, they remind every listener that the future is built not only by innovation but by remembrance. To carry their legacy forward is to ensure that the values they lived for, wisdom, fairness, and resilience, remain at the heart of Luxembourg's unfolding story. Their story, like the nation they shaped, is not finished. It continues with every decision made in kindness, every act of courage, and every moment of reflection on the unseen paths that led here. The Duchesses of Luxembourg are no longer forgotten. They live in the country's values, in its quiet confidence, and in the hope it brings to a complex world. Their spirit, steady and enduring, reminds all who listen that the smallest nations can hold the greatest wisdom, and that the most lasting legacies are written not in monuments, but in the hearts of people who choose to remember.